welcome to all of you. I'm thrilled that there are so many of you attending today and people who are interested in this topic as I am. In the course of my working with organizations, helping them improve customer satisfaction, I came to look at their feedback gathering processes. After all, if you're going to try to improve customer satisfaction, it's important to have some clue as to what that level of satisfaction is. And what I have discovered over a great many years of doing this and continue to discover today is that many organizations, if they gather customer feedback at all, do it in a way that's full of flaws. And what I mean by that is flaws that lead to distortion or potential misinterpretation of the results rather than useful information. So what I want to do today is to provide numerous examples of what to do and what not to do to gather useful, actionable feedback. And my emphasis on actionable is deliberate. It's one of the key things to keep in mind as you create your own feedback gathering mechanisms or evaluate the ones you already have. So 3 general topics I'll be focusing on today, starting with some key points, some general points about feedback gathering, when and how to gather feedback. Secondly, flaws and fixes. Here we'll be looking at some of the most blatant feedback gathering flaws, as well as some of the most subtle ones with lots and lots of examples. And third, case studies, 3 case studies of interesting and innovative approaches in organizations that I have visited. And you may be able to draw some ideas from them as well. The title of this webinar is 40 Feedback Gathering Flaws, and actually I haven't counted up how many I'm presenting to you, and I'm not going to number them as I go through them. I am pretty sure that I will present at least 40 flaws and suggestions for ways to fix them. I do want to emphasize that I'm focusing specifically on customer feedback, customer satisfaction feedback. Much of what I describe is relevant also in gathering other kinds of feedback, such as in the planning of new products or services, but my focus is specifically on customer satisfaction feedback. So what I often encounter when I ask organizations, what are you doing about gathering customer feedback? This is what I often hear. Something about, we've done a survey, we're thinking about doing a survey, we might plan on doing a survey. And that's fine as far as it goes. But to a certain extent, it misses the point. And this is the key point that I really want to emphasize, that feedback gathering is a process. It's not an event. Conducting a survey is an event, and it can be extremely valuable to conduct surveys if you do it without the kinds of flaws that I will be describing in this webinar. But by itself, doing a survey may not be sufficient. So let's look at a few aspects of feedback gathering in general in terms of ways to gather feedback. One, of course, and the most common way that we see is through surveys that are printed, email, or web-based. And these days, of course, more and more surveys are done online or on the web. And they can be fine. They can be very, very useful as part of a feedback gathering process. Secondly, by phone, surveys, interviews, and conversations. And obviously, if you're going to gather feedback by phone, you can't gather as much of it from as many different people as if you're doing a broad-based email or web-based survey. But what you will get in exchange is depth of feedback, higher quality feedback, because you are talking to people about what is concerning them, what's pleasing them, what is displeasing them. And in person, which is my preference where it's feasible, through meetings, one-on-ones, discussions, interviews, and so on. And what I have found in my own experience when I work with organizations is that when I have interviewed 6 or 10 or 12 different people from different parts of the organization, I have a very strong idea of what the level of satisfaction and dissatisfaction is with the services being delivered. And they might interview additional people just to make sure I'm not missing any crucial information and I'm aware of some of the outliers. But sometimes using these person-to-person, face-to-face, or at least voice-to-voice methods, you can get much better feedback than using a broad-based written kind of survey. And, of course, FBWA. And you do, of course, know what that stands for, right? If you recall, MBWA, management by walking around. FeedbackGathering is feedback by walking around. They tell you things when you're there that they don't tell you when you're not there. And that's a quote from a business analyst that I spoke to who spends a lot of time out in the client areas of her company. And she made this comment. And what she meant was not that the clients withhold information, but that simply when you're there, you come to know each other, you chit-chat, information surfaces that simply might not surface when you're not there, and that information can be useful in understanding how pleased or displeased those clients are. Let's also look quickly at when to gather feedback. Beginning with at the start of a new relationship or project, and you might say, well, how can we call it feedback at the start of a relationship or project? And I'll say, okay, it's not feedback, it's feed forward, but it's also what you might consider the baseline for gathering feedback, but because the start of a project or a new relationship is that initial opportunity to build rapport, to understand the client's criteria for success, to get some depth of understanding about the needs, concerns, and expectations, and especially to shape their expectations of you. Then, what's important is to gather feedback regularly throughout your working relationship, because this is the best way to track the status of their satisfaction, to learn about concerns that might justify changes, and really to communicate that we care, we're concerned about your views. Another time it may be useful to gather feedback is if you're making modifications to your processes and practices, those that would directly affect your clients, to make sure you understand their needs, concerns, and expectations, and also to give them a say about changes that will affect them. They will be more likely to support those changes if they have some input to those changes when they're being made. And fourth, after receiving negative feedback, and granted, when you've received negative feedback, that may be the last time that the last chance you want to go and say, tell me more about what it is you're unhappy about. But it can be also a very important time in the relationship to go and gather additional feedback, to make sure you really understand the complaints, to gather additional information to make sure you understand, and sometimes to provide an explanation if the client or the customer, has misunderstood. And it's also another way of saying we care. So in other words, gathering feedback throughout the relationship can be very important. Now, what I'm going to do is move into addressing some specific flaws, beginning with flaws in the basic assumptions about feedback gathering. Because it's a serious flaw to assume that no complaints mean clients are happy. Wouldn't we all love to believe that, but it's not necessarily the case. And additionally, that all complaints you've received are all there are. Though we may encounter all kinds of complaining going on, especially on the web these days, the fact is that most people don't like to complain. Either they don't know the words to use, or they're just uncomfortable about making a fuss, or they don't like to complain directly to someone who is responsible for delivering a service to them. So whatever amount of complaints that you hear in your business, there are probably more than that. And I want to offer one or two specific examples about the notion that no complaints means clients are happy. From a real situation, this was a project in which the clients, it was a software development group doing a project for clients, and the clients seemed to be pretty satisfied, at least they weren't complaining. At the end of the project, as was customary for this organization, they administered a post-project client satisfaction survey, at which time they discovered that the client had numerous sources of dissatisfaction. Why hadn't the client complained sooner? Well, who knows? We don't know that. But the fact is that, it could be that the client never complained simply because nobody ever asked directly.